we all have part of ourselves which we call monads, which are basically all parts of the universal energy or consciousness. Each monad puts down part of itself into each of our lives. Our higher selves consisting of higher mental faculties, our wisdom, intuition, and our spirit. This is what connects us. Everything and everybody has part of that spirit and connectedness to everything else. And this is what basically unites us. Unfortunately, we tend to lose sight of this. We don't recognize the fact that this is the case. Most people don't know this is the case. They talk vaguely about a soul. But souls in that sense are composite of various things. But the most important thing about them is their connective part to other monads and to the universal energy which exists everywhere in the cosmos.
Welcome, everyone. I am Ann Kelly. With me, the beloved Tim Wyatt. Hi there, Tim. You look so dapper today. How was your week?
Well, I've had a very interesting week, and I've been very, very busy trying to work on this particular script for a new film, and it's proving very difficult to reduce 15,000 words to 5,000 words in a nutshell. But it's been a wonderful week.
And it is an esoteric project as well. Can you tell us a little bit about it, or is it secret?
Well, it's a bit secret, but it's also about secrets because it's an esoteric history of the world. Tried to shoehorn all this into 60 minutes, and it's not proving very easy, covering 6 million years. Well, more than that, actually, 150 million years in 60 minutes. It's been defeating so far, but I will triumph and prevail eventually. Don't worry.
Yes, you will, because if anybody can do it, you can do it. And I am very proud of you. The esoteric history of the world from the very beginning of time, 1 hour. And I think you have to cut some of that hour. So it's about 45 minutes, probably. I'm really looking forward to that. And you've got a lot of fans here. Listen, Tim, we've got over 6,600 subscribers on YouTube, which is great. We've got healthy download numbers, and we've got brand new subscribers every week. And every week we learn a little bit more about what to do and what not to do. Mostly what not to do, but we are getting there. It's still a baby brand new podcast, but we want to say thank you to our viewers and listeners, especially Liziane. She writes, I can't have enough of you both. Thank you so much. I love this podcast. Thank you, Liziane. Isn't that sweet? And also, wait, JR says, look, my favorite channel. Where can I see you two live? We should go live sometimes. That's a big thing. Maybe we should do that. Go live over on YouTube, maybe. And our beloved Jonathan Douglas, Oak Apple Studios, every week he gives us a super thanks. Last week it was $15. He writes, I love you all to death. And we say to you, Jonathan, you are to die for. Thank you so much. He's a beloved student on the path, and he's always so generous. Thank you, Jonathan. And John G writes, actually, he gave us $20 last week, which is fantastic. Thank you, John. He writes, thanks for the great show. When I look around and I think, what does our world need most right now? I think it's your message right here at That Death Show. And John also said about Tim's latest documentary, which hit in the summer, and it's available for free to watch here on our YouTube channel. It's at That Death Show. The movie is called, it's the documentary, it's called The Myth of Death. John said, it was really well produced, and you don't need any existing knowledge to understand what Tim is unpacking there. Everyone should check it out. I really didn't think when I watched a movie about death that I'd come away feeling good. So I think that's a good testimony. If you want to watch it, it's free. Check it out on our YouTube channel. And a huge shout out to Theosophy Station, which John runs over on Instagram. Fantastic work done there. And then Chris Sheridan, listen to this, Tim. He says, I'm really loving these discussions. The chemistry between you two. Tim, we have chemistry. What do you think of that?
Well, no one's ever described me in chemical terms before, but there's a first time for everything, I suppose.
Well, I really do spend more time with you in the editing studio, listening to your voice and seeing your face than any man I have in probably my life. And he says the chemistry between you keeps things interesting and compelling. Thank you to you both. And that is Chris Sheridan. Again, he's our beloved Hollywood long-haired rocker. He's a guitar player, Tim. And the band was called Sweet Savage. And I'm surprised I didn't run into him back in the days on Sunset Boulevard at the Whiskey, the Roxy, and all that, the epicenter of long-haired rock and roll. He now hosts the Inner Life podcast, and he's the author of The Spirit in the Sky, a memoir. And I believe he's won an Academy Award for one of his short films. I may be incorrect there, but if not, it's such a small podcast, no one's going to check me on that. But I think he did. He also survived a plane crash, and he spent over half of his life in a wheelchair. He's got a very powerful, sacred story to tell. We're going to have him here on That Death Show with us at the top of the year, hopefully. He's worked quite closely in the Manly P. Hall Philosophical Research Society, and he is in the, I cannot wait to hear it. Thank you, Chris. So week after week, Tim and I do our best to help illuminate the path beyond death. We try to offer comfort, understanding, and confirm that we are indeed eternal energy. Death is not the end, but a transition to a new beginning. So last week, we touched on esoteric science's explanation of what the soul is. What is the soul? We talked about that. That's in episode 8. Today, Tim and I will dive into death and life. It's all part of the same cycle. So before we completely dive in, Tim, as we talk about the cycles, I'd like to hand it over to you and Electra.
Well, yes, I witnessed death just a few minutes ago as my cat came in with a live mouse, as she often does, even though she's 8.5 years old. And she chased it around the living room. And then 30 seconds later, the last bit of the tail just disappeared. And this happens a great deal, and nothing you can do about it. It's part of her instinct. You cannot stop her doing these things, however much cat food you give her. And also, death has featured over the last few days because a mutual friend of ours, Colin Boyce, passed away in a hospice from bone cancer on Saturday. We both knew him very, very well for years. He was a Canadian. He worked at the Theosophical Society for getting on 40 years in a number of different roles. And he was a very, very nice man indeed, and always had a quirky and strange sense of humor as well. Even towards the end when I spoke to him, he still retained that humor, and I really admired that in him.
He is amazing, and I know he's graduated. As we talk about death on That Death Show, Colin is now, he's been promoted to the other side, and I saw that he had passed. Bless him. He's always been such a servant to humanity. I hope he realizes what a powerful difference he made for all of us. For me, he was the very first experience with a human being inside the Theosophical Society. He signed my little cardboard card and took me in this dusty old library and opened this big book. And he was my very first experience with the TS, and all of us are going to miss him. There were hundreds and hundreds of people loving on him on Facebook and sending love to his friends and family. And I just know that he understood about death. I don't think he was frightened. I know he did a lot of work helping to ease the suffering of the planet and to help people understand what we're talking about on this show. So for Colin Boyce, let's dedicate this episode to him. We love you, Colin, and we will see you again. And that is a beautiful, beautiful, he's just such a gift to the TS and was dearly loved. I hope he knows that. I think he can hear us now. I'm sure he does. Tim, I wanted to ask about the consciousness in this physical life. Just really quick about you. What is your earliest memory? Just because we're talking about just being aware in the physical world. Just really quick, I wanted to know, what is your earliest memory, if you can go back in time before we get into the cycles?
I think my earliest memory is my first birthday, and I remember a cake with a single candle on it and a little wooden train which was on the top of it. It had white icing, but that's it. I don't remember much else until about the age of 2 when I went into hospital for an operation. So those are my earliest memories.
As you come into the physical world, you will exit the physical world. That's what we talk about on That Death Show. There's change in the middle there, but there's birth and this incarnation, and then we have death of the physical. But as Tim always reiterates here, we're talking about the esoteric science. This isn't Tim's opinion. This is the esoteric philosophy, the perennial philosophy, theosophy, if you will. Everything that is born will die, and it's totally okay, because you, the you that is you, is absolutely eternal. So the sun rises and sets, the moon waxes and wanes, tides go in and go out. We have growth and decay, sleep and awake, karma and reincarnation, life and death. So we talked about the immortality, about people wanting to preserve the physical immortality, Tim. Really quick, for those who are just tuning into that death show, can you recap a little bit on the esoteric science explanation of, though there are cycles of birth and death, that, like, for example, our friend Colin, the he that is operating as Colin in the physical world is eternal. We are eternal beings. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Well, we are essentially divided into two parts. We have a physical self, and then we have a higher self, a lower self, and a higher self. We have a personality, which is our body, our emotions, our thoughts for a particular life, and we relinquish all that when we die. But a higher element of ourselves, our higher selves, which consists of our higher mental abilities, our wisdom, intuition, and our connection to that universal spirit. This effectively is the soul, and this is the one that marches on and on and on from life to life, but taking on a new personality each time. Colin Boyce, the Canadian that we knew in this life, he might be a woman from a very different country. He might be very rich, he might be poor, he might be anybody. Depends on the needs of his soul to evolve.
Yes, and what we need to learn. And I think a lot of people getting their head around that is thinking, one, most of us don't want to come back. People are saying, I do not want anything to do with that. Life is too difficult. There's too much pain. But the part of Colin that is eternal has nothing to do with his name, his accomplishments, his work, his job, his family. He might reincarnate with some of his family. They say you reincarnate in groups, correct? Sometimes?
Sometimes, yes. Well, in many cases, there seems to be strong evidence that people belong to soul groups and they constantly reincarnate in different roles. Whether that applies to everybody, I have no idea.
So it's not just humans. Everything is cyclical. As we talked about last week, everything has consciousness, or say soul. Could I say soul, that everything has a soul because we're all part of the same thing, correct?
Yeah, everything has a soul, even members of the mineral kingdom, rocks and diamonds. Each atom in that is ensouled, as indeed everything is in the universe.
Everything is connected as well. And as science is beginning to catch up, I was watching Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think I'm saying that right. I hope I got his name right. He was talking about the electrons and the space in between the atoms, and their science is starting to look at this energy. Everything is energy. I think that might be easier for people to get their head around, instead of thinking everything is connected, but it doesn't look connected. Well, it's energy moving at different vibrations, so we are all connected. So everything is cyclical. It's not just the little list that I named, but can we talk about the universe is cyclical as well? Breath in, breath out. They talk about the Big Bang Theory. Can we talk about that a little bit, about how this universe is not always going to be here? Can you expand on esoteric science's explanation of that, please?
Well, in her book, Cosmogenesis, part of The Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky outlines this vast system in which, to put it simply, worlds are in manifestation and then take on other non-physical forms. And this goes through great big long cycles, which are far, far longer than the 13.8 billion years that the universe is said to have existed for since the Big Bang. Incidentally, the Big Bang was invented as a pejorative term by an astronomer called Sir Fred Hoyle. It was a term of ridicule which has come to be adopted. Sir Fred Hoyle went to the same school as I did, but not at the same time.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
When you say he came up with it as, what was his, was he trying to explain when things first came into, like, we call it the Manvantara and the Pralaya. The Manvantara is the breath out of creation. The Pralaya is a period of rest where there is nothingness, but it's not nothingness because it will become again. What is the Big Bang? To me, it sounds like possibly them trying to identify the moment of this particular creation of this particular universe, this incarnation.
Well, yes, and who's to say there was only one Big Bang? Maybe it's just a regular occurrence. Sir Fred Hoyle and his colleagues believed in a theory called the steady state theory, where the universe had always existed. It was infinite, eternal, etc., which also ties in with the secret doctrine, with the esoteric ideas. And basically what it means is that worlds appear and manifest in physical or other forms, and then they are in periods of what we call obscuration, periods of sleep. So it's basically sleep and activity. And who's to say that the Big Bang, if it exists, if it did exist, is the first and only one? And who knows what might happen? The universe is said to be expanding via something which they call the redshift, which I don't understand at all, but it's said to be expanding. And this is how they've managed to date it to 13.8 billion years.
But it's got to be older than that, because we're understanding with our limited human physical consciousness in our science. So I'm sure there's more to our story. Every year we learn there's more to our story. But understanding the cyclical nature of the cosmos, of which we are a part. So we're not separate from the stars. We are not. So we are stardust. You've heard that. Everything that we see, the carbon and the nitrogen and the oxygen and all that, that's come from stars that were here long ago. So we are physically stardust, but there's much more to the consciousness. So this can help us feel connected to something much, much bigger than ourselves and appreciate the fact that everything is interconnected, the importance of cycles. So, Tim, we need cycles to evolve. I know we talk a lot about pain is the usher of wisdom and difficulties are opportunities. And so there's polarity. There are no really just straight lines. We have to have cycles. Why?
We have to have cycles as part of an eternal dynamic. Otherwise, we would just completely vegetate. We need challenges. We need problems to solve so that we can increase our mental faculties, our physical faculties, and all our faculties. So we need things to stretch us. And you mentioned the law of polarity, and also the law of rhythm, or the law of cycles. And this is just the inevitable and perpetual rhythm of the universe and everything in it. Everything is evolving in its own way, at its own level, at its own pace.
Well, we talk about the cycles of, because we're dark to light, up to down, good and evil. All of this is all part of the cycle. So the polarities that Tim is talking about is that good and evil, like in the Kabbalion, which is absolutely making a resurgence. It's big on Instagram right now, which is fantastic. That's William Walker Atkinson writing as the Three Initiates. Basically, it's the same stuff. It's all the same stuff. But he talks about in there the polarities, and Tim can explain a little bit about this, is that good and evil are not opposites. They're part of the same thing. It's just a matter of measure. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, we tend to look on things in terms of polar opposites because it's the way that our consciousness has emerged for all sorts of reasons that we won't go into. We tend to see things in black and white, whereas we know that in the midst of every success is a little bit of failure. In the midst of every failure is a little bit of success. In the midst of all good health is a little bit of lurking illness. So all things are interblended together. When we talk about the law of polarity or the law of rhythm, what we mean is that things can only go so far in one direction, like a pendulum, and then it has to, inevitably, because of its dynamics, go back the other way. So a particular situation can only persist for so long, and whether that's a flower or a human being or a galaxy, it doesn't really make any difference apart from the timescales.
That is comforting, especially when things, because there's a lot of people going through it. Everybody's going through something in some magnitude. And one of the things that I learned in these teachings is when things are difficult, when things are hard and horrible and challenging, you are learning. That is a period of learning. But you also get a period of rest. And that means when you're like, things are great, I'm really enjoying this, I'm so happy, that's you resting, you're resting. But there will be, the cycle continues. And I think our suffering comes from wanting to stay in daytime or stay in the light all the time. Like we say, happily ever after. And I just really want to hammer home, and I try to tell this to my son, is don't expect it to last forever, because there will be coming periods of difficulty. And you will have learned from previous periods of difficulty, which will help you navigate these. So can we talk a little bit about that for those who are thinking, oh, once I get here, then I'm going to be happy or happily ever after, the periods of difficulty and happiness?
Well, that would be illusory to think that. Just during the time of our podcast, Dan, the world has changed dramatically. People have been born, people have died, a bit more land has sunk into the sea somewhere, a bit more land has appeared. So nothing stays the same for a moment. All we can understand, and the way we can best negotiate life, is by understanding that there are cycles, that there are times when it's going to be difficult. There are times when it's going to seem impossible. And some people take drastic action as a result of this. But we have to realize that we are part of an ocean, and that ocean is sometimes calm, and sometimes it's got 40-foot waves. So we have to just accept the fact that we don't know what's coming next, but our attitude to what happens is what's crucial to it.
Now that is wise. That is wise. You can't control anyone or anything else, no circumstance, nothing. Only your actions, your chosen actions, and your reactions, and sometimes your environment. Sometimes you can control your environment. You're going to remove yourself from something. But I think we spend a majority of our lives, I was earlier in my life, before I got a hold of these teachings where I went, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I have nothing to lose. I might as well apply them. And I found my life got a little bit easier to manage, meaning that exterior things still sucked and things were difficult, but I figured out a way to cope with those. So it was about applying them and understanding the bigger picture. But you are an eternal being. You will have a physical death. Again, it is not the end of you. You don't end there. Look at the massive amounts of near-death experiences coming in. I can't even keep up with them on YouTube. And I know you're doing a circuit. You were just on Life After Life, NDE TV. You can see just hundreds and hundreds of new episodes every single day of them coming back, and many of them absolutely echo what we talk about on this show. And I think if people are getting any value out of the show, which is wonderful to see that you are here, we just want to be able to share this with you to hopefully make your life just a little bit easier. You can get access to these teachings. What would you say? Obviously, we have Tim's book. We have everyone's Book of the Dead. You can watch the videos that are on this channel. You can find his books at firewheelbooks.co.uk. And these are really easy to understand. As John said, the Myth of Death documentary. Access these teachings. Where would you direct someone who's just coming across this podcast that likes what they hear? How should they begin to study like we did? And I know we've shared our stories, but how can they begin?
Well, interestingly, you mentioned the Kybalion, and just over 20 years ago, someone asked me to write a version of this in very, very simple language as part of a magazine. And this is actually one of the things that got me back into studying the Ageless Wisdom teachings. Not that I'd ever fully abandoned them, but it reignited my interest. And the Kybalion, it essentially explains 7 laws, the laws of mentalism, polarity, rhythm, etc., etc. It's not a long book, very easy to read, and I would recommend that thoroughly, because in an hour or so, you can absorb the essence of what these teachings are all about.
And I would have to hugely agree. It was William Walker Atkinson's Yogi Philosophy and Oriental Occultism. That's a very convoluted title, but was his works, which I was like, what is this? This is absolutely brilliant. I found out it was pointing towards a theosophical text, and I thought, what is that? What is theosophy? And that's how it all began, was Atkinson as well. He's had many nom de plumes. What else did he write under? He had the 3 Initiates, and Yogi Ramacharaka is one. But I'm trying to think. Anyway, it was theosophy, but it wasn't convoluted. It's relatively easy to understand. Also on this channel, you have some audiobooks. You have Light on the Path is a free audiobook here. Atkinson's first text that I came across. There is some study in the Kybalion on this channel as well, but just go and find what we've been talking about and apply it. And you will find that there are instructions for life, is what I have come to understand. There's also, and this is kind of a big thing right now. Well, it's been a big thing forever, but can we talk about, masculine, feminine? This is also a cycle. Like you mentioned, Colin could come back in China as a woman who possibly has, a missing leg. Whatever your soul needs to evolve, there are 6 cycles in the reincarnation, but there's also cycles in masculine and feminine. Can you speak on that a little bit, please?
Well, masculinity and femininity have become strangely controversial terms in this day and age. But, for example, the psychologist Carl Jung basically said that every man has a female portion within him, and vice versa. Every woman has an element of masculinity. So as we were discussing before, it's not black and white. Everything has a bit of its opposite contained within it. And it's finding out and blending those masculine and feminine energies. It's not having a superiority of masculinity or femininity, because we've seen that this doesn't work. Having superiority of one over another is a cosmic impossibility. You can only do it for so long. Ultimately, you have to harmonize what appear to be opposite and opposing energies. They're not. They're just part of a single energy, and they are the polarity, just the way that electric current flows from positive to negative.
That is gorgeous. Thank you very much for sharing that. So I think it is a spectrum. To me, it feels like a spectrum, and it could be, just a mass. Everybody could have a little bit of something in between there. So there's really no way to say absolutely this and absolutely that. I also have said previous conversations with Eddie, and I've talked about it on my stuff, is that way back in the day, in the earlier incarnations of mankind, we were both sexes, were we not?
Yes, in the first and second and partway through the third development groups of humanity, which in theosophy they call root races, we didn't have physical bodies, and we reproduced by splitting or budding later on. And eventually we became hermaphroditic. And then after that, we separated into two sexes when we acquired physical bodies, because for millions of years, human beings were just great big ethereal, mindless blobs floating around and not doing very much.
Well, that is something that I have mentioned when I see what is happening in the world. I think perhaps we might be returning to that, and possibly as we relate to maybe what was in a previous incarnation, perhaps that identity is coming through in this incarnation, and I feel more comfortable in that sex, or possibly we might be rejoining again as we come back around on this round. And really quick, I do want to say, when we mention the word race here in these teachings, it does not refer to ethnicity at all. It means, to me, in my understanding, I say it is a wave of humanity, a wave of existence. How would you define race before we go any further on that?
It's a development group of humanity. So we're said to be in the fifth subrace of the fifth root race, but that applies to people all over the world. It's a stage of development, a stage of consciousness, if you like, that we've reached. And it doesn't apply to any one ethnic group at all.
Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. That is a big comment drama that can happen sometimes on this channel. So do you believe that perhaps now, as we're in this particular round, that possibly we might be joining back together and going into the two sexes again?
Well, I think certainly what the ageless wisdom teachings say is that eventually, as we get into the next development groups, it's not precisely stated when, but we will become far less physical. And so by the end of the cycle, at the end of the seventh root race, as we call it, or development group, human beings won't have any physical aspects to them at all. And on the way, it may be that as we become more ethereal and don't have physical bodies, we will no longer reproduce sexually the way we do at the moment. It's said that we will have a power which in Sanskrit is called Kriya Shakti, which means creating by mind alone. So, the dating agencies and all the other accoutrements of male-female relationship will disappear. So, people will have to think about business models for the future.
Actually, that's fantastic. I hope if people with open minds are listening to what we're talking about, this is all very, very hopeful, and it gives much, inspiration for the future. And thank you for sharing that. That's some of the stuff, to touch on it. There's going to be people that are there might be a backlash, but just listen to what we're saying. It isn't just coming from us. We are students of the ageless wisdoms. We apply them in our life, and we want to get them out there and share them with you. You are an eternal being. And as you were saying the words human being, you are being a human. You're literally, I remember the first textbook I had when I studied with the Theosophical Society was Man is the Universe in Miniature, or whatever. It was Joy's book, I think it was. Does that make any sense? Yeah. So I was thinking, man is the universe in miniature. You're being a human, but you are all consciousness. You are being a human now and observing in your little meat suit, but you are all that is. Your spark and a piece, like rays from the sun. So can we touch on that? Esoteric science talks about that. We're here only for a moment in these physical bodies, but the us that is us is eternal, and we are being human. We are not human beings with a soul. We are the universe having a body for a moment. That's the ultimate cycle.
Okay, let's put it very simply. We all have part of ourselves which we call monads, which are basically all parts of the universal energy or consciousness. Each monad puts down part of itself into each of our lives. Our higher selves consisting of higher mental faculties, our wisdom, intuition, and our spirit. This is what connects us. Everything and everybody has part of that spirit and connectedness to everything else. And this is what basically unites us. Unfortunately, we tend to lose sight of this. We don't recognize the fact that this is the case. Most people don't know this is the case. They talk vaguely about a soul. But souls in that sense are composite of various things. But the most important thing about them is their connective part to other monads and to the universal energy which exists everywhere in the cosmos.
It's comforting. And it's also, I remember when I first came across it, I thought, I don't even, I've been looking for this for so long. I don't even know what to think. I just want more. I was an insatiable student. And I just am so grateful to be a part of this podcast. I can't believe a half hour has already blown by. Remember that change, loss, and death are the biggest fears, but there's nothing to fear because it is the ultimate cycle. You're born, and then what's going to happen is that you are going to die. And that is okay. It is not, as Tim says, fatal, final, or permanent. So before we go, Tim, is there anything you would like to cover that we might not have touched on today about cycles?
Well, basically, life goes on forever in different forms, in physical form and in non-material form. And in fact, as human beings, we probably, having reached a particular stage of evolution, we probably spend more time out of physical form than we do in it, because we may have many hundreds of years between lives. We may reincarnate quickly. It depends upon our circumstances, our degree of development, and what our soul actually needs. Maybe the soul needs to rest for a long time between arduous lives. Maybe it needs to come back quickly. Depends on individual people's circumstances.
I know we can't get it done in one lifetime. I do not know how you could possibly evolve in 50 years, 80 years. You are an eternal being having a human experience, and death is coming to all of us. It's not a tragedy, though. It doesn't have to be scary. It is a guarantee. And as we talked about, we are closer to death now than we were when we began the podcast. So it's okay, though, too. And please, please, please check out on that Death Show YouTube channel. Tim does have a movie, a documentary as well called Cycles of Eternity, and the book, which is available at firewavebooks.co.uk. And remember, you don't have to have a near-death experience to gain the wisdom earned there. And Myth of Death, don't forget, it is winning film festivals, winning notoriety at film festivals all over the globe and from Theosophy Station on Instagram. Check it out. It is available for free to watch. It's only about 40 minutes long, and it's very palatable, and it's extremely comforting. It's the most comforting film I have ever watched on death, and it's the reason Tim and I sit here in these chairs. This is the purpose of the podcast. Please, if you can, share, like, subscribe, comment, review. Help us reach more people so that everyone can have access to the ancient wisdom, the ageless wisdom, the timeless wisdom that we discuss in these podcasts. It will change your life. It changed ours. We are here to be of service. So next week, Tim, I think we're going to have some singing and dancing. It's going to be the Christmas special, the That Death Show Christmas special. You want to tell them what we're going to do? We're going to be on Christmas Day.
Well, Christmas is a special time, obviously, for Christians, but all cultures throughout history have celebrated this time of the year because it's the time of the solstice on the 21st or 22nd of December. And for 3 days, 4 days, the planets seem to go retrograde, and everybody regards this as the end of the old year and the beginning of the new year. So since it's about death and rebirth, we're going to talk about reincarnation, specialize on that because it's about rebirth.
The winter solstice, reincarnation, and I think definitely we should talk about a Christmas Carol, a little bit of that. There's a lot of theosophical themes in that. So we're going to have a Christmas day with you. Please spend it with us. And we look forward to seeing you on the 25th of December. That is coming up next. So thank you so much. Remember, there's so much more. We just skimmed the surface. Today it was cycles. Next time, Christmas Day, we're going to be talking about, remember, everything has an end. Winter goes away and a new year is born. And that is a very sacred time. So thank you very much, Tim. I love you. And I look forward to seeing you all next week on Christmas. Bye, everybody. Death comes to us all, but death is not a tragedy. Everyone's Book of the Dead by Tim Wyatt reveals a whole new perspective on what lies beyond this earthly life. The Egyptians have a Book of the Dead. The Tibetans have a Book of the Dead. Shouldn't you have one too? This captivating, richly illustrated book explores the mystery of death by examining it from every angle, sharing the ageless esoteric teachings on karma, reincarnation, and after-death states, as well as examining death and dying in different cultures, religions, and spiritual traditions. Death is not fatal, final, or permanent, but simply a transitional doorway to a new beginning. Get your copy of Everyone's Book of the Dead today at firewheelbooks.co.uk.